Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fit Finance Sessions with me, Henry Elliston, Tim Wood, and just back from his holidays and now self-isolating, Mr. Tom Senegals. Hello, chap.
Hi. Highly contagious. Please don't come near me.
Today we're going to talk in the week that Boris has just nominated two new chiefs to the BBC. We're going to theme our talk around BBC, namely Biden, Brexit, and COVID. But to start, Tom, tell us all about Joe Biden and the US presidential election.
Yeah, so I think there's some data out from The Economist, which is predicting a very strong Biden win, pretty much across all fronts, and also saying that he'll likely have control of the Senate and the House. So, which is a good thing because that provides a more effective government. If there's a split in the House and the Senate and who's the president, then it makes it harder for them to govern, harder to get legislation through. But it's looking less and less likely like a Trump win. Now, that doesn't mean to say that will happen. Polls are always, well, not always, but can be quite wrong sometimes. But in terms of what that happens in terms of investments, then there's probably more likely to be corporation tax rises. Biden's talking more about they're moving more towards the left, even for the Democrats, more towards sort of Sanders-esque policies, and giving more power to the workers rather than the wealthy. That's kind of the tone being taken. So increasing corporation tax rises, which will reduce corporate earnings in America. So there are some headwinds for America. I think you've seen high valuations, good earnings, but that will dampen things. If Trump does win, then that'll be more positive. But there's also going to be more spending on healthcare and other bits and pieces. So lots more stimulus. Stimulus means more inflation. So need equities to provide a hedge against those going forward. But also maybe, I know we've been saying it for years, but maybe the long ball run that American stocks have had is maybe starting to slow with a slightly stronger dollar, and just those earnings being hampered by a corporation tax. The big tech companies are probably still going to generate lots of cash. I don't see them selling off, but it's probably just putting a bit of headwind on US stocks, and maybe provides more opportunities in European and undervalued UK stuff.
It's quite interesting actually looking at that. I was looking at a chart of the S&P 500 the other day, and if you strip out the FANGs, Facebook, Amazon, Netbook, there's a couple of others I can't remember, Google, Alphabet. The rest of the S&P is pretty much flat. It hasn't made any growth at all, and yet the S&P, I think it's up to like 15% over the course of the year, just driven by the growth in those stocks, which is extraordinary.
It's very lopsided. I think that's why you see indexes like the FTSE being down, because there's no exposure really to large tech companies, and same in Europe. There's some healthcare orientated stuff which helps, but yeah, US is very dominated by those few companies at the moment, and arguably the rest of the economy could deal with some better stimulus, and I think the election kind of just delays that, and whether it's a smooth transfer of power if Biden does win, that's another thing altogether.
Yeah, no, quite. I think it's Donald Trump, for his sins, of which I'm sure has many. He has had a very loose monetary policy over in the States, and it certainly helped drive that growth in share price that we've seen over the last few years, hasn't it? And I don't think Biden will be quite so friendly to business as you describe.
Yeah, and I think there'll be less share buybacks, which generate a lot of that share price growth as well going forward. So it doesn't mean completely rotate out of US stocks, but they've been relatively, on relative terms, expensive, and I think there's just maybe some extra headwind coming there. But again, if you're diversified, it shouldn't matter too much. But equally, if you've been riding along or jumping on the bandwagon with certain investment strategies, then maybe time to think about other things as well.
Maybe rotate into European equity. Tim, what do you reckon with that, with Brexit coming up?
Good God. Yeah, well,
Segue, I'm sure you'll agree.
sorry.
Seamless segue, I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll agree.
Yeah, thanks for that, Henry. No, I was going to mention this week, bringing Brexit back into the focus. I think in the UK particularly, there's a bit of COVID fatigue, particularly market-wise. People are more interested, I think, on Brexit than COVID, particularly in the UK. I think this week we're going to have a round of negotiations, if you can call it that, fighting, tug of war, whatever you want to call it. And the mood has been described as being a little bit better than it has been in the past. I think it was the last couple of weeks, really, we've seen sterling fall off a cliff as it was sort of I can't remember the percentage off the top of my head, but the chance of a no deal going through was more than 50%. Although I read this morning that actually the banks have put that, or the market / banks, which I think the same thing, I put it down to 40% now. So now it is more likely that a deal will come through. And then, yeah, relating that to sterling, we've seen a lot of volatility already this morning, bouncing sterling back up as a result of that. In terms of how then that impacts markets and things, typically a strong sterling hurts the UK-based economy or the UK biggest companies, mainly because the majority of their earnings come from overseas. So, other foreign countries buying goods or services over here, they have to convert their currency into UK pounds to do business with us, which obviously a strong pound would hurt them. So typically then that normally means a fall in FTSE 100, but actually I think I read something this morning on HSBC have had some quite good grounds over in China. So that boosted the market. But again, it's just sort of daily stuff, isn't it, rather than the broader picture I'm talking about here. But yeah, just another week of progress, hopefully, a little bit more confidence coming back into us versus the block, as it were.
Yeah. But sterling generally is still fairly cheap, though, isn't it? If you take a historic view on the matter.
Yeah, for sure, it is. I mean, I'm talking sort of month-to-month basis. It's the last couple of months has fallen off massively, but yeah, now it's bounced back up. I think the last month, sort of beginning of this month, as a result of sort of the COVID and the second scare in COVID, then people rushed to the dollars and yen and that kind of thing. As a result, which then people obviously you've got to sell one asset to buy another one. So people, a strong dollar then results in the falling of other bits and pieces of people moving out those and going into what are perceived to be the safe haven assets, such as the greenback, as it's called more colloquially.
In the US, the UK definitely seems cheaper relative to other markets. If you're talking about, I mean, the US is back at 3.3 on the S&P, talk of it going to 3.6, and where UK wise is still considerably down on previous highs.
Yeah, still floating. And as you said earlier on, the S&P really, I've always said well, not always, but recently to clients, the S&P is so heavily skewed towards tech and things. It's a bit of a hard way, or you can't really relate that to the US economy on the whole. I mean, it's always that Wall Street versus Main Street thing, isn't it? I think the Russell 2000 as an index of the US is a little bit more reflective of the country more broadly, because, as you say, I mean, it'd be interesting to do a little bit more research on how those FANG companies, really can sway the S&P. Just those 6 companies or 5 companies, however many there are.
I think people in index funds are. There's always been an issue around, I mean, if you hold the FTSE, you hold such a large allocation of HSBC, for instance, and I think those indexes with the winners and losers at the moment they're less representative, and therefore is it still the best place to be putting your money?
Yeah. It's interesting. You see that chart that showed that the Apple market cap is now the same as the UK GDP.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary. Anyway, right. So Brexit's going to happen is what we're hoping, and sterling gets a little bit more expensive if it does.
Yeah, indeed.
Quick bit from me to see on COVID. It seems like that since last week, what's happened in COVID? Rishi said he's not going to do a budget. which is a shame because that was weeks of material for this podcast in guessing what he was going to put into the budget and then analysing it once it came out. So sadly, we can't do that, or at least they're going to be long forecasts now because I suspect the budget won't happen until March next year. He's got rid of the furlough scheme and he's bringing in a new, slightly peculiar scheme that's not impossible to understand, but it's not far off. But ultimately, I think you've got to work a third of your hours. If you work a third of your hours, your employer pays you 55% of your wages and the government will give you another 22%, which will work for some, but not for others. So it's an interesting thing. People have different views on COVID as to whether or not we should be still locked down to the degree that we are, or whether or not we should be allowed to move somewhat more freely. Here in Oxford, with all the students around, passing it to one another, I'm not sure whether through proximity or just through being in their halls. It's a tough thing, but I suspect that it's not going to get any easier between now and the new year. And with Brexit on the horizon as well, I think it will make for some fairly interesting economic and political moves over the course of the next few months. But no one will know until we see them, I guess. So there we are. Thanks very much for joining us as ever. I hope that those wise words have given you something to think about from the other two, not so much from me. And we look forward to speaking to you again next week. Bye-bye for now.